Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. In this video, I'm going to give some advice on making location-based adventures, dungeon adventures, in this one anyways. I've done some videos in the past where I kind of talk about running the game and that I think it's fairly easy if you have some kind of basic tips called generic advice. I can't remember what they called them, but I'll put links. And in those, I talk a little bit about that I think that somebody should create their own adventure when they're going to run, as opposed to running a pre-written adventure. I'm sure some people disagree with me. I'm sure I'll hear about it in the comments. But I think when you write your own adventure, you have a better grasp of it. And it's not as hard to write the adventure as you might think. And I gave examples in those videos about what are most commonly called event-based or narrative-based or story-based adventures. That is, the party, something happens that the party needs to react to or wants to react to. And they go and do a thing and they come back, right? So it's kind of based on an event. What we're going to talk about when we talk about dungeons is more of a location-based. That is to say, the dungeon exists, the players are going there, player characters are going there to explore, to loot, or any number of reasons. These things can tie in. That is to say, you can make a dungeon that has some kind of a story-based reason for going to it the first time, right? So the party might go to this dungeon to rescue somebody or to retrieve something, and then they see, hey, there's a whole area here that we could explore, and they go back to it. So there's lots of things. Now, there are mega dungeons, which I've talked about, and then there's just dungeons, or we'll call them mini dungeons maybe, which are, my definitions here are going to be a mega dungeon's a multi-level structure that is designed kind of usually as a campaign backbone. That is to say that there's lots of levels you can get in it, and you're probably not going to be able to complete the thing in any short amount of time, right? You're often going to go back to it. It's going to be 10 levels deep, 12 levels deep. Gygax's dungeon was 13 levels deep. So that's what I'm talking about when I say mega dungeon. Shifting, changing, growing, big. A mini dungeon is one that's maybe like for a one-shot or a two-shot. So you might have multiple levels, but they're generally smaller. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, so before we get deeply into this, I want to give a few kind of definitions, if you will, or kind of round out my definition of what is a dungeon. Now, a lot of people will basically say a dungeon is just any location, right? A ruined tower is a dungeon, etc. I've had this conversation before, and we'll talk about other locations in the future, but today I just want to talk about what I consider a dungeon. Now, a dungeon to me has generally three qualities. It is the underworld, it is generally unpredictable, and it is in itself a puzzle. That is to say, it's not just a location that you go to and fight monsters. There's something else going on there. There's a certain element of weirdness, even if that's not the basis of the dungeon or the theme, which we're going to talk about now. So, especially for what I'm going to call a mini dungeon, you want to have some kind of a theme. Mega dungeons, you'll do the same, but you'll do them by level or series of levels, and your theme is going to kind of give you an idea of where this thing's going to go. It doesn't have to be in every single room. It doesn't have to be consistent, and it shouldn't be super specific. It should be more like an overarching idea. So some ideas might be that it's a monster's lair, right? So this one is probably overarching, right? You've got this monster here. It's a dragon. It's goblins. It's hobgoblins. It's gnolls. Whatever it is, it's a monster's lair. In this type of situation, you're going into this lair of this monster for a specific reason to explore and loot, probably, because that's just what you're doing, right? There could be lots of reasons why you do it, but in general, it's a lair of a monster. This is going to change the vibe slightly versus, let's say, it's a contested space. That is, it's multiple types of creatures that are vying for the same space. So you might have, for instance, rumors that there's lots of treasure inside this dungeon that was an old wizard's hideaway, right? But now it's occupied by orcs. So it's an orc lair, and you're going to go there and it's going to be full of orcs. You're maybe not out there necessarily to fight the orcs, but you're out there to get the treasure from the old wizard, so they're in the same space. Now, a contested space might be a larger space that was used for whatever, and maybe it's some kind of just weird underworld area, and there might be goblins and gnomes, right, that are fighting it out, right? They each live there. They are fighting each other. This is going to affect the layout of the dungeon and also how you can kind of operate, right? Because if you have two contested people fighting, then you might be able to take one side or the other. Another theme would be a death trap. So a death trap dungeon is basically like your Tomb Horrors would be the classic example, or White Plume Mountain. Some of these older AD&D modules had this vibe where basically some power set this thing up, whether it be an evil lich or a wizard or whatever, and it's got lots of challenges for the players. This is going to be full of traps usually and just weirdness that doesn't necessarily go together. This allows you to be a little bit more gonzo, if you will, because when a evil wizard sets up a death trap dungeon, they just put that, chimera down there in stasis. They don't care about, where it feeds and how it, goes to visit its family. It's just there, right? So this allows for a lot more freedom there, and it can be a little bit more kind of open-ended. I think these types of dungeons are great for new dungeon masters because you don't have to worry too much about the whys and wherefores, and also layers, unless you really get deeply into it, can be boring because they often are repetitive, right? Like you're fighting orcs and you're fighting more orcs and you're fighting more orcs, whereas in a death trap, there's a little more stuff going on usually. But we'll talk about spicing up layers in a second. The final one that I'm going to talk about, there's lots of themes obviously, would be some kind of elemental theme. These can often be something related to it. So it could be like an old tomb of a priest of some fire god, right? So all the monsters, all the traps, all the stuff in there are going to be fire related. And maybe you're seeking out a flaming sword as the prize, right? But generally when I'm saying elemental, as far as theme, I'm talking about like something related to the element, not necessarily full of that element, especially not at low levels. At higher levels, you might have a dungeon that's just full of fire, and maybe you have ways that the party can circumvent it with magic, and they have a limited amount of time before that magic wears off, and that could be really fun as well. That becomes even more of a death trap, right? So really themes can be endless, right? It really comes down to what you want to do. So think in your mind, what would be a cool overarching idea, and start from there. What's nice about this is that it allows you to have a baseline. So if you know that it's an orc lair, and you know that orcs operate a certain way, they use this kind of furniture, they decorate this way, they have this kind of guards, you can kind of have this in your mind. So as you're describing the space, you don't have to keep coming up with a new description for every single room. It basically, you could say, well, this is an old dwarven ruin. All the halls are of cut stone, perfect cut stone with ornamental runes, at the top and the corners. All the doors are set really perfectly, stone doors that swing with no sound. So you can make this like all the rooms kind of statement up front. And what's nice about that is it then sets you up for if you have one weird room where it's like, this room has a wooden door, then the players will be like, hold on, a wooden door? Why is there a wooden door here? And that's nice. So that's one reason why I go in that direction. Or you're in this fire temple and all of a sudden there's one room that's like blocked off and they find our secret room and they go in there and they see that there's a shrine to the water god, right? What's going on here? So this could be really interesting. Maybe that's actually an entrance to another dungeon or not. Now, speaking of entrances, let's talk about that a little bit. When you are creating these spaces, you want to have, I would say on average, from 2 to 4 ways in and out of each level. That means 2 to 4 ways into the dungeon from the surface, 2 to 4 ways from level 1 to level 2, or it might be level 2 to the exit. You want to have lots of ways for them to come in and out. And this doesn't necessarily have to just be stairs. In fact, it probably shouldn't be, right? There might only be one main staircase that brings you down, but there could be pit traps that drop you down to the next level. There could just be pits that drop you down to the next level where you can do it without it being a trap, right? There could be a ladder there, or maybe the ladder's rusted away. Maybe there's ropes that are hanging there that people have used in the past, or some kind of a mechanism, a pulley mechanism. There can be teleporters. There can be all different ways. Oh, another cool thing is just slightly slanted hallways. This is great for your dwarf character that generally can notice those things, but also it's a great way to get them on the second level without them knowing. Again, that becomes like a trap or a trick. So have any number of ways, but I'd say at least 2 to get between levels and in and out of the dungeon. This allows for lots of activity to happen and for the players to strategize. I'll add too, some of these things can be either hidden, really weird and interesting that the players will have to figure out, like let's say a river runs through, right, and then comes out somewhere else. They could figure out how to hold their breath long enough or figure out a way to go underwater to get into it or to another space. They can also be things that are traps or one-way doors, right? So they go through this door and there's a staircase, they go down, and when they come back up later, they can't get back to that door because it's blocked. Now they got to figure out what the other way up is, right? So they don't. And of course, if they didn't spike the door open or check it again after they walk through it, they're not going to know that. So if they come back to this area, not ready and they're being chased, that could be a problem for them. So again, it could add a little excitement to the adventure. All right, let's talk about size for a second, and then we're going to talk about stocking the dungeon. So I think per level of a dungeon or per area, about 12 to 15 rooms feels about right, in my opinion. These rooms, going by kind of your standard D&D stocking rules, would be 1/3 of them will have monsters, 1/3 will have treasure, 1/3 will be empty. Now, some of the empty rooms will have treasure, and some of the monster rooms won't have treasure and will have treasure. So, it's not like monsters in one room, treasure in another. It's like monster with treasure most of the time, treasure by itself, rarely, sometimes completely empty rooms, right? That's what I mean when I talk about that. And what we can do is, if you want to make it real simple, just roll a 6-sider. On a 1, there's monster and treasure. On a 2, there's just a monster. And if you roll a 3, it's just treasure. I like to roll randomly and then just go back and see if what I've got. If I have too many monsters and not enough treasure, or too much treasure, not enough monsters, or too many empty rooms, or not enough empty rooms, then I just make adjustments, either by adding a room or two if I love everything I have, or by putting something in an empty room or adding treasure to a monster or that kind of thing. While I'm here, let me just talk quickly about treasure. Generally speaking, you want to give enough treasure and experience points depending on your game. If you're playing an old school game, usually treasure is experience. It could also be for killing monsters if it's a game that's where you get experience points for. It could be for solving puzzles. Make sure you put enough experience so that based on the party size, an average fighter can get 1/4 of their level. That is to say, if you have a party of 4 characters in BX Dungeons and Dragons, where a fighter takes 2,000 experience points to go up from level 1 to level 2, there should be 2,000 experience points on that level. That means they're going to each get 500 experience points for going through it. This way, assuming you can clear a level a session, because every 4 or 5 adventurers, maybe 3 to 5, you want to be leveling up in a game like this. There will be big gaps, like there'll be times where they don't get any experience points and they'll get a whole bunch, but generally speaking, that should, if you look at your overall vibe, that's where you should be at. That being the case, you just want to make sure you have enough. If you don't have enough treasure, add some. If you have way too much, it might be okay. Just evaluate where you are in your campaign. I wouldn't, if it's your very first adventure with a brand new party, don't give them a gazillion experience points in the first adventure if that's not going to be the way the campaign is going to run, because that'll be very disappointing later on for them. So, if they go into the first dungeon and they get 10,000 experience points, which they wouldn't be able to, I'm not going to get into all those rules, but let's just say they get 10,000 gold pieces, why would they adventure again? Right? I mean, so you want to tease them in, but big treasure hoards can be great as well as you move through. That was a total side note. So let's get back to this. So we've got in summary, we've got our theme. We've got our number of rooms, let's say 12 rooms. So our theme is going to be a death trap, we'll say. Our number of rooms is 12. We're going to have about 4 empty rooms, about 4 rooms with monsters, and about 4 rooms with treasure. Again, the treasure rooms will be mixed in about. So we basically end up with, and I know you're saying to yourself right now, well, hold on, that might end up being not enough rooms if the treasure's in the empty rooms and the monster rooms. True. So you might have to add a couple extras. You'll make it work. I have faith in you. Now we want to add traps. So think about what the trap should be doing in your dungeon. This is important. Just rolling randomly and going, oh, a pit trap with poison spikes coming up, and then 2 doors down from that is the orc's bedroom, and there's no other way in and out. That doesn't really make sense unless you're going to build this whole elaborate mechanism where they can turn it off or turn it on, which is fine, but unnecessary if you just plan ahead. So let's talk about why people put traps. I've made a whole video about this, but let's just go over it briefly. Okay, you've got dangerous traps, which could kill things. You have traps that warn people that are coming. You have traps that capture, right? You have traps that just block egress. And then you have traps, or maybe it's more of a trick, that are teleporters. I love teleporters. So if you're a lair, you're going to have more traps that are capture, warn, right? If you're a death trap, you're going to have dangerous traps that block egress with monsters chasing people, that kind of stuff. Because remember, even in a lair, you can have traps that block egress too, right? So people, they're running, they hit the trap, and the door closes, right? The door closes, maybe it can only be opened from the other side. And of course, monsters that know the dungeon can walk around, just open it from the other side, right? So they know the dungeon, it's their lair. How would they bottleneck and trap people who are intruding into their lair? That's how you want to think about those kind of traps in a lair situation. In a death trap, you just want to think of them in a fun, kind of zany way that it's what is going on here? And oftentimes you want to tie those in with puzzles. Maybe I'll do a whole video about just death trap dungeons. Let me know if you're interested in that, because it's one of my favorite kind of dungeons, to be honest with you. I love a good zany death trap, so let me know in the comments below if you want a whole video on that. But anyways, you want to think about your traps. So think about, obviously, your players are going to be your players, right? You know how long you play for, how big your group is, what type of play they tend to involve themselves in. Just think about what would generally take a session or two and build your mini dungeon around that. Now, if you are brand new, right, because I just said that, but I'm saying this is for new people, follow the advice here. About 12 rooms, which means you're going to have about 4 monster encounters. And again, that doesn't mean they're going to be combats. You're going to have a decent amount of treasure, right? And you're going to have maybe a couple of traps depending on the layout of the dungeon and who occupies it. So let me just quickly kind of rough out off the top of my head a dungeon based on what I just said here. Okay, let's go with the monster lair. We find that, we'll take the first idea ahead. We find that we've found a treasure map, right? The party is given a treasure map, or they find a clue that they're under this, mountain. There is a passageway into a wizard's old workshop where there should be some magic items or great treasures, right? So the party wants to go there. But when they investigate, they realize there's an orc lair kind of right in their way. The orcs have occupied the mountain. And while the players know that there's a secret door that leads to the wizard's lair, they've got to get through the orcs lair to get there. Now, this opens up a lot of options, right, for the players, because they can think, well, if we just want to get to the wizard's lair, we don't even need to fight the orcs. They could go in and negotiate with them, right? They could sneak past them. They could go in and fight. Now, the orcs, you can think about, maybe make a reaction roll if you're not sure. What's their disposition? Like, are the orcs under siege by people all the time? Are the orcs just set up here and camping and kind of resting? What's their reason for being here? And how friendly or not friendly are they going to be to anybody who happens to show up? Okay, so think about that. Now you have a situation, right? Kind of like what we talked about in the more kind of situation-based or event-based. What are they going to do? So we build our dungeon. We've got these 12 rooms. Obviously, we want the secret door room to be hidden and probably in an area that the orcs aren't using. So that's almost certainly going to be in an empty room, right? Because it's just some back part of the dungeon they're not using. Maybe we place a weird monster in the room before it. And then, so we've got empty room with secret door. Before that room, we're going to have weird kind of monster, maybe some kind of ooze or something bizarre that could like live in the dungeon without bothering the orcs if they blocked it off. So they blocked it off somehow. It's a gray ooze that can't eat through stones. So they put a stone block there or whatever in front of the way. So you've got secret door with an empty room, gray ooze here, stone thing. And so now we know where we need to go. Of course, players don't know that yet. Now we know we don't want, the orcs aren't going to want to be right there, but they'll probably send patrols around there. So you might make the room right before the rock be a room that's like people that orcs there'll be a chance orcs could pass in and out of. So that could be one of your monster encounters. Then you're going to want to think, what's their lair? So you're going to have some kind of a guard room near the front of the dungeon, right? And you're going to want to have some kind of area where they sleep, right? Or, food, eat, or whatever. So you build those rooms, and now that's your orc encounters. Now, you just got to stock the rest of the dungeon out with some empty rooms, put some treasure in the various places. Again, you could roll for it, and you're good to go. Would the orcs have some traps? Probably. I'm thinking that if you have this guard post up front, then you might have like a hallway right after it with some doors. Maybe there's like I talked about before, a trap where doors close. It traps people that go in there. That way, if somebody tries to get past the first guard, they can run through and close the players into this area. Now, of course, anybody who's on the outside can't get through the doors because you can only open them from the inside. So that orc's going to run through to do that, hopefully, right? And the trap won't be effective unless that orc's alive. So you'll have to have them react to the players and run, right? So this is, again, another thing. So this is an encounter where the orc already kind of has a pre-planned idea. He's going to try to stop them. If he sees the party's too tough, and I say but there could be multiple orcs, could be 6 orcs or something, so it might be a whole group of them. They are going to try to block the players, but let's say that there's 6 of them, and 2 or 3 die. You just know in your head, if that happens, one's going to run back and just close the door. Now the players can't get through, right? And so now they're trapped. And maybe, and of course, because there's multiple ways into the lair, there's some other secret entrance that they're going to come around and attack the players from the back. So this is the orc strategy. You already have this in your head. But if the players are fast, they use a sleep spell, they negotiate with the orcs, whatever it is, they don't get trapped through that. Now they can move into the rest of the dungeon, explore, If they fight the orcs, get some treasure from that. If not, they go to the room with the rock with the gray oozes. They move that. We put some treasure in there for sure, just in case players go that way. And they get right through, right? If they get through and they can negotiate it without fighting any orcs, also cool. It's all how they want to play it. But we have a cool, fun location. Make sure that if you have clever players and you think they might do that, that you kind of rough out that next section with the wizard's lair too. Okay, so that's essentially how you make a dungeon location-based adventure. And I kind of threw a little narrative story into the end as well. So these things are not necessarily self-standing, right? And the beauty of this is you can make this orc lair the way I just described and not even have any wizard's thing on the other side and nothing. And then when something comes up in play where they discover that this wizard's thing is lost, you just stick it there. These are things you can prepare on the side, because sometimes I get asked, well, what happens if they're wandering through the wilderness and they find a lair? Well, you just make a few ahead of time, right? And here you go. Let me know what you think. Do you use location-based adventures? Does this make sense to you? Let me know in the comments below what else you'd like to see on the channel. Also, check the description. You can find a link to my Discord server. Sign up over there. Join the conversation. Lots of fun stuff going on over there. And there's a link to my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel. I'll talk to you soon.